Doomsday Without a Moon by Jansen Davies. Chapter 1. The Theft. They came like thieves in the night. From the far side of the moon, where Earth's telescopes rarely linger, the Gantorian fleet emerged, vast silhouettes blotting out constellations, their hulls shimmering with alien geometry. The ships were not built in any human sense. They seemed grown, lattices of black crystal and living metal, pulsing with a rhythm that was both mechanical and organic. They moved in silence as if the vacuum itself conspired to hide their approach. The first tether struck the lunar surface with a soundless quake, then another and another. Hooks of impossible alloy sank deep into the regolith, anchoring themselves in the ancient scars of craters. The moon shuddered, dust pluming into space like a ghostly halo. On Earth, no one noticed. Lovers still walked beneath its pale glow. Children still dreamed under its silver watch. The tides still rose and fell, obedient to their ancient master. Humanity slept, unaware that its oldest companion was being stolen. The Gantorians pulled. Engines flared with a light that bent the spectrum, a force that mocked gravity itself. Slowly, impossibly, the moon shifted. Its orbit broke. The tethered body began to drift, dragged into the abyss like prey caught in a hunter's snare. The aliens had no malice. Their purpose was cold, mathematical. A wormhole portal between galaxies had ruptured, a wound in space-time threatening to devour entire star systems. The Earth's moon was their answer, a plug of stone and history to seal the breach. But for Earth, the theft was catastrophe. The first tremors of imbalance rippled through the oceans. The tides faltered, confused. The planet's axis wobbled, infinitesimal but deadly. In the Pentagon, a clock began to tick, not toward war, but toward extinction. And in a cramped loft in Boston, a man named Stewart McNally sat at his desk, opening his 100th rejection letter. His field, selenology, the study of the moon, was a curiosity at best, a joke at worst. He was a scholar of a subject no one cared about. The world was about to learn that the moon was not just a light in the sky. It was the anchor of life itself, and without it, Doomsday had begun. Chapter 2. The Forgotten Scholar. Stewart McNally had never been anyone's first choice. His loft was a cramped museum of lunar obsession, maps of craters pinned to the walls, tide charts curling at the edges, shelves sagging under the weight of journals no one read. A telescope leaned against the window, its lens cracked from years of use. He lived surrounded by the moon's echoes, a man devoted to a subject the world had dismissed. Tonight, rejection number 100 lay open on his desk. The letter was mercilessly brief. Your research lacks relevance to current astrophysical priorities. Stewart crumpled it, tossed it onto the pile. He rubbed his eyes, wondering how many more years he could endure being invisible. Then came the sound. At first he thought it was thunder, but the rumble grew, mechanical, insistent. Helicopters. Their blades churned the night air, rattling the windows. Searchlights swept across the street, painting his loft in harsh white beams. Stewart froze, heart pounding. His phone buzzed. Unknown numbers. Government codes. He ignored them until the pounding at his door began. "Dr. McNally," a voice shouted. "Open up." "We need you." Stewart blinked, disbelieving. Him. Needed. He stumbled to the door, opened it to find agents in black uniforms, faces grim. Behind them, a convoy of armored vehicles blocked the street. "What is this?" Stewart stammered. The lead agent thrust a tablet into his hands. On the screen, live footage from orbital satellites. The moon, shrinking, drifting away. Tethers glowed against its surface, alien ships dragging it into the void. Stewart's breath caught. His life's obsession, his endless studies, suddenly mattered. He whispered, almost to himself, "They've taken it. The agent's voice was sharp. "You're the top selenologist alive. The Pentagon needs you. Now." Stewart's mind raced. He thought of tides, of Earth's delicate balance, of the countless lectures he had given to empty rooms. He thought of the ridicule, the laughter. And now helicopters circled overhead, and the world's leaders were desperate for his voice. He grabbed his notes, his charts, his battered briefcase. As he stepped into the night, the searchlights followed him, illuminating a man who had been forgotten, now thrust into the center of history. Above, the sky looked wrong. The moon was already smaller, dimmer, its orbit unraveling. Stewart whispered a prayer he hadn't spoken in years. "Hold on." The agents pushed him into the convoy. Sirens wailed. The city blurred past. Stewart clutched his briefcase, knowing that everything he had studied, everything he had been mocked for, was now the only hope Earth had left. And somewhere deep beneath the Pentagon, a clock had begun to tick. Chapter 3. First Tremors. The moon was gone. At first, the change was subtle, so subtle that only the most sensitive instruments noticed. Seismographs twitched. Ocean buoys reported anomalies. But within hours, the world began to feel it. On the coast of Maine, fishermen stared in disbelief as the tide surged without warning, flooding docks and sweeping boats into the harbor. In Bangladesh, rivers drained suddenly, leaving mudflats cracked and steaming under the sun. In Sydney, the ocean rose like a wall, smashing against the shoreline with no rhythm, no pattern. The tides had gone mad. Stewart McNally sat in the back of the armored convoy, clutching his briefcase as agents relayed reports. He listened, horrified, as the world unraveled. "The moon's gravitational pull," he whispered. "It's gone. The oceans are unmoored." The agent beside him frowned. "Unmoored?" Stewart's voice trembled. "The moon is the metronome of the seas. Without it, the tides lose their rhythm, currents collapse, coastlines drown. Entire ecosystems depend on that cycle. Without it—" He trailed off, staring at the chaos unfolding on the tablet screen. In California, surfers fled as waves rose unpredictably, towering one moment, vanishing the next. In Venice, canals drained, gondolas stranded in muck. In Tokyo, the bay surged inland, swallowing neighborhoods. The Pentagon's doomsday clock ticked louder. But the oceans were only the beginning. Without the moon's stabilizing influence, Earth's axis began to wobble. The change was microscopic at first, but Stewart knew what it meant. Seasons would shift, winters would stretch into years, summers would scorch continents, crops would fail. And then came the psychological toll. Hospitals reported waves of insomnia. People stared at the night sky, unsettled by its emptiness. The moon had been humanity's companion for millennia, a constant presence in myth and memory. Its absence was a wound in the collective psyche. Children cried, unable to sleep. Poets wept. Priests called it a sign of apocalypse. Stewart closed his eyes, remembering his lectures to empty halls, his warnings ignored. He had always said the moon was more than a rock. It was Earth's anchor. Now the anchor was gone, and the ship of humanity was drifting into chaos. The convoy sped toward the underground command center. Stewart gripped his briefcase tighter, knowing that when he arrived, he would have to explain the unthinkable. That the theft of the moon was not just a crime against Earth, but the opening act of Doomsday. Above, the sky looked wrong. The stars seemed sharper, crueler, without the moon's soft glow. Stewart whispered to himself, "We are already unraveling." And the tremors had only just begun. Chapter 4. The Command Center. The convoy descended into the Earth. Stewart McNally felt the vibration as the armored vehicles rolled through a blast-proof gate, down a tunnel lined with steel and concrete. The air grew colder, heavier. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, illuminating a labyrinth that seemed designed to withstand the end of the world. Deep beneath the Pentagon, in a chamber shielded by concrete and steel, a clock began to tick. It was not the familiar nuclear countdown of Cold War nightmares. This was something new, something worse. A digital display glowed red, its numbers sliding downward towards zero. The label above it read, Doomsday Clock, Lunar Absence Cascade. At the heart of the facility lay the command center, a cavernous chamber carved into bedrock, humming with servers, screens, and the restless energy of crisis. Generals, scientists, and intelligence officers crowded the room, their faces pale in the sterile light. Screens flickered with live feeds, oceans surging unpredictably, satellites drifting off course, weather systems unraveling. The absence of the moon was not a theory. It was a catastrophe unfolding in real time. Stewart McNally stood at the edge of the room, clutching his battered briefcase. He felt small, absurd, surrounded by men and women who had dismissed him for years. Yet now every eye turned toward him. Stewart was ushered to the front. He clutched his briefcase, feeling the weight of every rejection letter he had ever received. Now those same men and women who had ignored him stared as if he held the keys to survival. The Secretary of Defense spoke first. "Dr. McNally, you are the foremost expert on lunar science. Tell us what happens next." Stewart hesitated, then opened his case. He spread tide charts, orbital diagrams, and annotated maps across the table. His voice trembled, but grew steadier as he spoke. "The moon is Earth's stabilizer. Without it, the oceans surge unpredictably. Our axis wobbles, seasons collapse, ecosystems unravel. Civilization cannot survive this imbalance. Every hour we delay, the damage accelerates." Screens flickered with evidence. New York Harbor flooding, Venice canals drained, Tokyo Bay swallowing neighborhoods, migratory birds veered off course, coral reefs bleached, farmers reported crops wilting under sudden shifts in temperature. A climatologist added, "We're already seeing atmospheric instability. Jet streams are faltering. Weather systems are breaking apart." The room fell silent. The Pentagon's doomsday clock ticked louder, its red numbers sliding toward zero. Stewart looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of generals and scientists alike. "We cannot adapt to this. We cannot survive without the moon. We must retrieve it." Arguments erupted. Some demanded military action against the Gantorians. Others insisted diplomacy was the only path. A few whispered of surrender, of accepting extinction. Stewart raised his voice, surprising even himself. "Listen to me. The Gantorians are not our enemies. They are sealing a galactic wound, but Earth cannot pay the price. We must act together. Every nation, every fleet, humanity must pursue them." The Secretary of Defense nodded grimly. "Then it's decided. We assemble a fleet. Every country contributes. We chase them into the void." Stewart exhaled, his hands trembling over the maps. He had spent his life studying the moon, mocked and ignored. Now he was the voice of survival. Above, unseen, the moon drifted farther into the abyss, and deep underground, humanity began to plan its pursuit. Chapter 5: Psychological Eclipse. The moon was more than stone. It was memory, rhythm, and myth. Humanity had lived beneath its gaze for millennia, shaping calendars, rituals, and dreams. Its absence was not just physical, it was spiritual. Within days of the theft, hospitals reported waves of insomnia. Patients stared at the night sky, unsettled by its emptiness. Children cried, unable to sleep without the silver guardian overhead. Poets wept. Priests called it a sign of apocalypse. In New York, a psychiatrist described the phenomenon as lunar trauma. "We are creatures of rhythm," she explained to reporters. "Our bodies, our minds, our cultures, Everything has been tuned to the moon's cycle. Without it, we unravel. And unravel they did. In Tokyo, thousands gathered in Shinjuku Square, chanting for the moon's return. In Cairo, imams declared the theft a divine punishment. In Paris, artists painted black canvases, mourning the loss of light. Across the globe, humanity's collective psyche fractured. Stewart McNally watched the reports from the underground command center. His heart ached. He had always known the moon was more than a rock. He had lectured about its influence on tides, ecosystems, and orbital stability, but he had never spoken of its hold on the human soul. Now he saw it firsthand. Sleep cycles collapsed. Farmers misread the seasons. Migratory patterns faltered. Even crime surged as nights grew darker, more chaotic. The moon had been a silent regulator, a guardian of order. Without it, humanity drifted into madness. Stewart stood before the gathered scientists, his voice low but urgent. We are not just losing balance. We are losing ourselves. The moon is woven into our biology, our culture, our spirit. Without it, humanity will not endure. The room fell silent. Screens flickered with images of riots, vigils, and mass hysteria. The Pentagon's Doomsday clock ticked louder, its red numbers sliding toward zero. A climatologist whispered, "It's not just physics, it's psychology. Civilization itself is collapsing." Stewart nodded grimly. This is the psychological eclipse, the darkness within, and it will only deepen. Above, the sky remained empty. The stars gleamed sharper, crueler, without the moon's soft glow. Humanity stared upward, searching for the companion that had guided them for millennia. But the moon was gone, dragged into the abyss, and Earth was unraveling, mind, body, and soul. Chapter 6. The Voice of Reason. The command center was fracturing. Screens blazed with images of chaos, armies mobilizing, borders closing, fleets arming themselves. Nations accused one another of complicity in the theft. Conspiracy theories spread like wildfire. Some claimed the moon had been sold, others that rival governments had engineered its disappearance. The fragile unity of Earth was splintering. Generals shouted across the table, "China is mobilizing in the Pacific. Russia has accused NATO of sabotage. India is threatening to launch preemptive strikes." The room was a storm of voices, each louder than the last, each demanding action. The Pentagon's Doomsday clock ticked down, its red glow casting shadows across the chamber. Stewart McNally sat at the edge of the table, his briefcase open, his charts spread before him. He listened, heart pounding, as the world's leaders tore at one another. He had been ignored his entire life, dismissed as irrelevant. But now silence was no longer an option. He stood. Enough. The word cut through the noise. Heads turned, generals glared, scientists blinked. Stewart's voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that silenced the room. "You are fighting over borders while the planet itself is collapsing," he said, his tone steady, deliberate. "The moon is gone. The tides are unraveling, the axis is wobbling, ecosystems are failing, humanity is fracturing. If we do not act together, there will be no nations left to defend." The generals bristled. "And what do you propose, Doctor?" Stewart met their eyes one by one. "Unity, cooperation, pursuit. The Gantorians are not our enemies. They are sealing a galactic wound. But Earth cannot pay the price. We must retrieve the moon. Not as Americans, not as Russians, not as Chinese, but as humans." Silence followed. The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Stewart pressed on. "You all know me as a forgotten scholar, a man whose field was mocked, but I know the moon better than anyone alive, and I am telling you, without it, Earth dies. If you continue to fight each other, You will hasten that death. If you unite, you may yet save us." The Secretary of Defense leaned forward, eyes hard. "You're asking us to trust aliens, to gamble the survival of Earth." Stewart shook his head. "I am asking you to trust science, to trust reason, to trust that humanity is stronger together than divided. The moon is our anchor. Without it, we drift into chaos. With it, we have a chance." The room was still. The doomsday clock ticked louder, its red numbers sliding toward zero. Finally, a climatologist whispered, "He's right." Then another voice, "We must unite." And another, "For Earth." The storm of arguments quieted. The generals exchanged uneasy glances, but the fury had drained from their faces. Stewart's words had pierced the noise, cutting through centuries of rivalry and suspicion. For the first time since the theft, humanity's leaders listened not to fear, but to reason. Stewart McNally, the forgotten scholar, had become the voice of survival. Chapter 7. Ecological Collapse. The oceans had already gone mad. Now the land began to follow. Reports streamed into the command center, migratory birds veering off course, whales beaching themselves in mass confusion, coral reefs bleaching without the tidal flushing that sustained them. Stewart McNally stood before the screens, his face pale, his voice steady. "Every ecosystem on Earth is tuned to the moon," he explained. "The tides feed estuaries. The cycles guide migration. The rhythms shape reproduction. Without the moon, the chain collapses." On the monitors, the collapse was undeniable. In Alaska, salmon runs failed as rivers surged unpredictably, leaving spawning grounds dry. In Africa, wildebeest herds wandered aimlessly, their migratory instincts scrambled. In the Pacific, plankton blooms vanished, starving entire food chains. Farmers reported crops wilting under sudden shifts in temperature. Winter stretched longer in some regions, summers scorched others. The wobble of Earth's axis was subtle but devastating, throwing climates into chaos. Stewart's voice grew heavier. "This is not just imbalance. It is cascade failure. One collapse triggers another. Soon, the biosphere itself will unravel." The generals shifted uneasily. They were men of war trained to fight enemies with guns and armies. But this was a war against physics, against nature itself. A biologist spoke, her voice trembling. "We're seeing mass die-offs. Birds, fish, insects. If the pollinators fail, crops will vanish. Famine will follow." The Pentagon's doomsday clock ticked louder, its red glow casting long shadows across the chamber. Stewart pressed his hands against the table, leaning forward. "Listen to me. This is not a slow decline. It is exponential. Every day without the moon accelerates collapse. Humanity has weeks, not years." Silence followed. The screens flickered with images of chaos, fields barren, rivers dry, oceans surging. The world was unraveling, thread by thread. Finally, the Secretary of Defense spoke. "Then we have no choice. We must pursue the Gantorians. We must retrieve the moon." Stewart nodded grimly. "Yes, or Earth will die." Above, the sky remained empty. The stars gleamed sharper, crueler, without the moon's soft glow. And below, the living world began to collapse, one heartbeat at a time. Chapter 8. The Wobble and the Launch. Earth began to tilt. At first, the change was imperceptible, fractions of a degree, invisible to the naked eye. But Stewart McNally knew what it meant. He had warned them in lectures no one attended, in papers no one read. Without the moon's stabilizing pull, Earth's axis would wobble like a drunkard staggering across the cosmos. Now the wobble was real. Winter stretched longer in the northern hemisphere, snow burying cities that had never known such cold. Summer scorched the south, deserts expanding overnight. Crops failed in unpredictable waves. Farmers stared at ruined fields, their livelihoods erased by a planet that no longer obeyed its own seasons. The Pentagon's Doomsday clock ticked louder, its red glow casting shadows across the underground command center. Stewart stood before the gathered leaders, his voice steady despite the chaos. "This is the cascade," he said. "The wobble destabilizes climate. Climate destabilizes food. Food destabilizes civilization. Every day without the moon accelerates collapse. We are running out of time." The Secretary of Defense leaned forward, eyes grim. "Then we launch." And so humanity prepared. Factories roared to life across the globe. Engineers worked without sleep, designing ships not for exploration, but for pursuit. Nations that had once been enemies now shared blueprints, metals, and fuel. The fleet was a patchwork of human ingenuity: Russian thrusters, American guidance systems, Chinese hull plating, European life support. From deserts, tundras, and oceans, rockets rose. Their flames lit the night sky, a defiant answer to the void. Stewart watched from mission control, his heart pounding as the first wave of ships broke free of Earth's gravity. On the screens, the fleet assembled in orbit, a constellation of human will, fragile but determined. Stewart whispered to himself, "Bring her home." The Gantorians were already dragging the moon toward the wormhole, their ships glowing with alien energy. Humanity's fleet pursued, engines burning, nations united in desperation. For the first time in history, Earth had launched not for conquest, not for exploration, but for survival. The wobble deepened, the seasons fractured. The doomsday clock ticked closer to zero, and above the trembling planet, humanity's fleet streaked into the void, chasing the thieves of the moon. Chapter 9. The First Confrontation. The fleet rose from Earth like a storm of fire. Hundreds of ships, patched together from every nation's technology, burned across the void, their engines blazing against the black. Stewart McNally watched from mission control, his heart pounding as the constellation of human will assembled in pursuit of the stolen moon. On the screens, the Gantorian vessels glowed with alien energy, dragging the lunar body toward the wormhole. The moon looked wrong, scarred by tethers, its orbit broken, drifting farther from Earth's embrace. "Distance closing," a technician reported. "Will intercept within 48 hours." The command center erupted in tension. Generals demanded battle plans. Scientists argued for diplomacy. Stewart stood at the center, his voice steady. "We cannot afford war," he said. "If we destroy their ships, the moon may be lost forever. If we fail to act, Earth dies. We must understand their purpose before we strike." The generals bristled. "Purpose? They stole our lifeline." Stewart met their eyes. "Yes, but not out of malice. Look at the trajectory. They're dragging the moon toward the wormhole. They mean to seal it. This is not theft. It is desperation." Silence followed. The screens flickered with images of the wormhole, a wound in space-time, its edges shimmering, its core devouring starlight. The Gantorians' ships strained against its pull, their engines burning with impossible force. Stewart's voice dropped to a whisper. "They are saving the galaxy, but at the cost of Earth." The room erupted again. Some demanded immediate attack, others argued for negotiation. The doomsday clock ticked louder, its red glow casting long shadows across the chamber. Stewart raised his voice, cutting through the chaos. "Listen to me. If we fight, we risk everything. If we do nothing, Earth collapses. We must confront them, not as enemies, but as equals. We must demand the moon's return and offer another solution." The Secretary of Defense leaned forward, eyes hard. "And if they refuse?" Stewart's gaze held steady. "Then humanity must decide, save Earth or save the galaxy." The fleet closed in. Engines roared, weapons armed. Humanity's first confrontation with the Gantorians loomed. Above the trembling planet, Stewart McNally whispered to himself, "Reason must prevail." And in the silence of space, the moon drifted toward the wound in the stars. Chapter 10. The Pursuit. The fleet streaked across the void, a fragile constellation of human defiance. From deserts, tundras, and oceans, rockets had risen, their flames lighting the night sky. Now, in orbit, they formed a patchwork armada, ships cobbled together from every nation's ingenuity. Russian thrusters, American guidance systems, Chinese hull plating, European life support. Humanity's survival stitched together in steel and fire. Stewart McNally stood in mission control, his eyes fixed on the screens. The moon loomed ahead, scarred by alien tethers, dragged inexorably toward the wormhole. The Gantorian fleet glowed with impossible energy, their ships straining against the wound in space-time. "Distance closing," a technician reported. "We'll intercept within 24 hours. The room buzzed with tension. Generals demanded battle plans. Scientists argued for diplomacy. Stewart raised his voice, steady and deliberate. "We cannot afford war," he said. "If we fire on them, the moon may be lost forever. If we fail to act, Earth dies. We must confront them, not as enemies, but as equals." The generals bristled. "And if they refuse?" Stewart's gaze held steady. "Then humanity must decide, save Earth or save the galaxy." The fleet pressed on. Engines roared, weapons armed. Pilots whispered prayers into their comms. The moon drifted farther, its pale light dimming, its orbit broken. In the command center, the Pentagon's Doomsday clock ticked louder, its red glow casting long shadows across the chamber. Stewart felt the weight of every second, every heartbeat. He had been mocked, dismissed, forgotten. Now he was the voice of reason, the anchor of humanity's survival. He leaned closer to the microphone, his voice calm but resolute. "This is not a war. It is a pursuit. We are chasing thieves, yes, but thieves who believe they are saving the universe. We must show them that Earth cannot pay the price." Silence followed. The fleet burned onward, closing the gap. And in the silence of space, the first confrontation loomed. Chapter 11. The Dark Matter Bomb. The command center was silent, save for the ticking of the Doomsday clock. On the screens, the Gantorian fleet strained against the wormhole, dragging the moon closer to its event horizon. The wound in space-time pulsed like a living thing, devouring starlight, threatening to consume entire galaxies. Humanity's fleet shadowed them, weapons armed, engines burning. But Stewart McNally knew the truth. Even if Earth reclaimed the moon, the portal would remain. The Gantorians were not thieves. They were desperate engineers, sealing a galactic wound with the only tool they could find. Stewart stood, his hands trembling over the table of charts and diagrams. He had been mocked his entire life, dismissed as irrelevant. Now every eye turned toward him. "There is another way," he said. The generals leaned forward. "Speak." Stewart took a breath. "The wormhole is a wound in space-time. Plugging it with the moon is crude, temporary. But there is a weapon, an idea I've studied in theory, a bomb, not of matter, but of dark matter." The room erupted. Scientists shouted in disbelief. Generals demanded clarification. The Secretary of Defense slammed his hand against the table. "Explain yourself, Doctor." Stewart's voice was steady, deliberate. "Dark matter is invisible, untouchable, but it shapes the universe. It binds galaxies, bends light, stabilizes the cosmos. If we could concentrate it, detonate it, we could collapse the wormhole, not plug it, seal it, permanently." The biologists stared, horrified. "A dark matter bomb?" That's impossible. Stewart shook his head. Not impossible. Dangerous. Unprecedented. But possible. We have the technology to simulate gravitational collapse. If we harness dark matter, we can trigger a chain reaction that forces the wormhole shut. The generals exchanged uneasy glances. And the risks? Stewart's gaze was grim. If it fails, the explosion could destabilize the galaxy. If it succeeds, the wormhole closes, and Earth keeps its moon. Silence followed. The doomsday clock ticked louder, its red glow casting long shadows across the chamber. Finally, the Secretary of Defense spoke. "You're asking us to gamble the universe." Stewart met his eyes. "I am asking you to save Earth without sacrificing the galaxy. The Gantorians are desperate. We must show them another way. The dark matter bomb is our only chance." The room fell into hushed debate. Some argued it was madness. Others whispered it was genius. Stewart stood alone, the forgotten scholar turned prophet, his voice the anchor of reason. Above, the fleet closed in. The moon drifted closer to the wormhole. The stars bent under its pull. And deep underground, humanity prepared to gamble everything on a weapon that had never been built, a theory that had never been tested. The dark matter bomb. Chapter 12. The Countdown. The command center became a forge. Stewart McNally's words still echoed in the chamber. The dark matter bomb is our only chance. Now the world's greatest minds bent themselves to the impossible. Engineers, physicists, and mathematicians worked side by side, sketching equations across glowing screens, arguing in hushed, urgent tones. Factories across the globe roared to life. Particle accelerators were commandeered, their experiments halted, their machinery repurposed. Satellites were cannibalized for exotic alloys. Every nation contributed, not out of trust, but out of desperation. The Pentagon's doomsday clock ticked louder, its red glow casting long shadows across the chamber. 20 days, then 15, then 10. Stewart stood at the center of it all, his charts and diagrams spread across the table. He had never commanded a room before, never been more than a footnote in the margins of astrophysics. Now generals and presidents leaned in when he spoke. "The bomb must be delivered at the wormhole's event horizon," he explained. "Its detonation will collapse the aperture. But the timing must be exact. Too soon, and the wormhole destabilizes further. Too late, and the moon is lost." The generals bristled. "And who delivers it?" Stewart's gaze was steady. "The fleet. Humanity's fleet. Every ship must protect the carrier until the bomb is in place." On the screens, the Gantorian vessels strained against the wormhole, dragging the moon closer. The lunar surface was scarred by their tethers, its pale light dimming as it drifted farther from Earth. Pilots whispered prayers into their comms. Engineers worked without sleep. Scientists argued over equations that could decide the fate of galaxies. And Stewart McNally, the forgotten scholar, became the anchor of reason. He stood before the fleet's commanders, his voice calm but resolute. "This is not just about Earth. This is about the galaxy. The Gantorians believe they are saving it by sacrificing us. We must show them another way. The dark matter bomb is that way. But it will cost us. Some of you will not return." Silence followed. Then a pilot's voice crackled over the comms. "For Earth." Another. "For the moon." And another. "For all of us." The fleet prepared, weapons armed, engines burned. The bomb, humanity's most dangerous creation, was loaded into the carrier ship, its core pulsing with invisible energy. The countdown began. Above the trembling planet, the fleet streaked toward the wormhole. The moon drifted closer to the abyss. The stars bent under its pull, and deep underground, the doomsday clock ticked toward zero. Chapter 13. The Chase. The fleet burned across the void, engines roaring against the silence of space. Hundreds of ships, patched together from every nation's ingenuity, formed a fragile armada, their thrusters blazing like a constellation of fire. They were not sleek explorers, but desperate pursuers, cobbled together in haste, driven by necessity. Humanity's survival rode on their hulls. Ahead, the Gantorian vessels glowed with alien energy, dragging the moon ever closer to the wormhole. The lunar surface was scarred by tethers, its pale light dimming as it drifted farther from Earth's embrace. The wormhole pulsed like a wound in the stars, devouring starlight, bending the cosmos around it. In mission control, Stewart McNally leaned over the console, his voice steady despite the chaos. Maintain pursuit. Do not engage. We must understand them before we strike. The generals bristled. They stole our lifeline. We should fire now. Stewart shook his head. If we destroy their ships, the moon may be lost forever. If we fail to act, Earth dies. But if we fight blindly, we risk the galaxy itself. Silence followed. The Doomsday clock ticked louder, its red glow casting long shadows across the chamber. On the fleet's comms, pilots whispered prayers. Some spoke of vengeance, others of survival. All stared at the pale sphere ahead, their hearts aching for the companion that had guided humanity for millennia. Then, for the first time, the Gantorians responded. A signal crackled across the void, alien tones, layered frequencies, a language that bent human ears. The fleet's translators struggled, algorithms racing to decode. Finally, words emerged, distorted but clear. The wound must be sealed. The moon is the key. Do not interfere. The room erupted. Generals demanded retaliation. Scientists argued for negotiation. Stewart raised his voice, cutting through the storm. They are not our enemies. They are desperate, but Earth cannot pay this price. We must show them another way. The fleet pressed on, closing the gap. Weapons armed, engines burned. The moon drifted closer to the abyss. And in the silence of space, humanity's first confrontation with the Gantorians loomed. Chapter 14. The Offer. The fleets faced one another across the abyss. Human ships, fragile and patchwork, burned with the fire of desperation. Gantorian vessels, vast and alien, glowed with crystalline energy, their tethers dragging the moon ever closer to the wormhole. Between them hung silence, broken only by the hum of engines and the pulse of the wound in space-time. Stewart McNally stood in mission control, his voice steady as he addressed the gathered leaders. We cannot fight them. If the moon is destroyed, Earth dies. If the wormhole remains open, the galaxy dies. We must give them something they cannot refuse. The generals bristled. And what is that? Stewart spread his charts across the table, his hands trembling but resolute. The dark matter bomb. We offer them a solution, a weapon powerful enough to seal the wormhole permanently. They can save the galaxy without sacrificing Earth. The room erupted. Some shouted in disbelief, others whispered in awe. The Secretary of Defense leaned forward, eyes hard. You're proposing we hand them our most dangerous creation. Stewart's gaze held steady. Not hand it to them. Deliver it together. Humanity and the Gantorians, side by side. They need the moon. We need the moon. But the galaxy needs the wound sealed. This is the only path. Silence followed. The Doomsday clock ticked louder, its red glow casting long shadows across the chamber. Finally, the fleet transmitted the offer. Across the void, the Gantorians responded. Their voices were layered frequencies, alien tones bent into human comprehension. You would risk collapse of the cosmos. You would gamble existence itself. Stewart stepped forward, his voice calm but fierce. Yes, because we have no choice. Earth cannot survive without the moon, but with the bomb you can seal the wound forever. We will build it. We will deliver it. Together. The Gantorian fleet fell silent. Their ships hovered, engines dimming, tethers straining against the lunar surface. The wormhole pulsed, devouring starlight, demanding sacrifice. Then came the reply. If you succeed, the wound is sealed. If you fail, all is lost. But your courage is undeniable. We accept. The chamber erupted in relief. Generals exhaled. Scientists wept. The fleet's pilots whispered prayers of gratitude. Stewart closed his eyes, his heart pounding. Humanity had made the offer. The Gantorians had accepted. Now the race was not to reclaim the moon, but to build the bomb, deliver it, and gamble the fate of galaxies. Above the trembling planet, the fleets aligned, not as enemies, but as allies. And deep underground, the Doomsday clock ticked towards zero. Chapter 15. The Bomb. The fleets aligned at the edge of the abyss. Human ships, fragile and patchwork, hovered beside the vast crystalline vessels of the Gantorians. Between them pulsed the wormhole, a wound in space-time, devouring starlight, bending the cosmos around it. The moon hung tethered, scarred, its pale light dimming as it drifted closer to the event horizon. Stewart McNally stood in mission control, his voice steady as he addressed both fleets through the comms. This is the moment. The bomb must be delivered at the exact threshold. Too soon, and the wound expands. Too late, and the moon is lost. Timing is everything. The carrier ship moved forward, its hull trembling under the strain of the bomb within. The dark matter core pulsed invisibly, a weapon that had never been tested, a theory that had never been proven. Pilots whispered prayers, engineers held their breath. The Gantorians formed a protective shield around the carrier, their ships glowing with alien energy. Humanity's fleet flanked them, weapons armed but silent. For the first time, enemies moved as allies. The carrier reached the event horizon. The bomb was released. Silence. Then light. Not ordinary light, but a bending of the cosmos itself. The wormhole convulsed, its edges collapsing inward, its core imploding. Stars bent, space rippled, time itself shuddered. The wound screamed in silence, then folded shut, vanishing into nothing. The fleets reeled, instruments flickered, pilots gasped, and then silence again. The wormhole was gone, the galaxy was saved. But the moon still hung, tethered, scarred, drifting. Humanity held its breath. Chapter 16. The Return. The Gantorian fleet moved. Their ships released the tethers, engines flaring with alien light. Slowly, carefully, they guided the moon back toward Earth. The pale sphere drifted across the void, scarred but whole, returning to the orbit it had known for millennia. On Earth, oceans calmed, tides found rhythm, seasons steadied. Humanity exhaled, children slept beneath the silver glow once more, poets wept with joy, priests sang hymns of mercy, the psychological eclipse lifted. In mission control, Stewart McNally watched the screens, tears in his eyes. He had been mocked, dismissed, forgotten. Now he had stood at the center of history, the voice of reason that saved Earth. The Gantorians transmitted one final message, their voices layered frequencies bent into human comprehension. The wound is sealed. The moon is yours. We return it in gratitude. You have shown courage. You have shown reason. You have shown us another way. Their ships turned, engines flaring, vanishing into the stars. The moon shone once more above Earth, scarred but eternal, its light a reminder of the day humanity stood together, faced extinction, and prevailed. Stewart stepped outside the command center, gazing upward. The moon hung in the sky, pale and perfect. He whispered to himself, Welcome home. And the doomsday clock went dark. Epilogue. The anchor restored. The moon shone once more above Earth. Its surface was scarred by alien tethers, its orbit slightly altered, but it was home again. Oceans breathed in rhythm, tides obeyed their ancient pulse, and the axis steadied. Humanity exhaled as if the planet itself had been holding its breath. Children slept beneath its glow, dreaming in silver light. Farmers sowed seeds with renewed faith. Poets wrote verses of return. Priests spoke of mercy, and lovers walked beneath the pale lantern that had guided them for millennia. The psychological eclipse lifted. The Gantorians were gone, their crystalline ships vanishing into the stars. But their final message lingered. You have shown courage. You have shown reason. You have shown us another way. Stewart McNally stood alone beneath the night sky, gazing upward. He had been mocked, dismissed, forgotten. Now he was remembered, not as a prophet of doom, but as the voice of reason who had saved Earth. His name would be etched into history, not for brilliance alone, but for clarity, for courage, for mercy. The doomsday clock was dark, its red glow extinguished, its numbers frozen at 0. Humanity had faced extinction and prevailed. Stewart whispered to the sky, his voice trembling with awe. Welcome home. The moon gleamed, scarred but eternal, its light a reminder of the day humanity stood together, faced the abyss, and chose survival. And in that glow, Stewart McNally found peace. Later, he found his first article acceptance letter sitting on his entry table. The end. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.